Hey guys, what's up? It's Menta, and this is the lead stack we're going to be making today. Right, so let's get started. Let's get nailed in. It's made up of four layers. We got a character lead, which is this. It's going to play at the right point, which is this. Tell you what, we'll turn off all the processing so you can hear what it sounds like completely dry. Then we've got a supersaw. Pretty basic. A high supersaw. Add a little bit of high end, and then just a noise layer. Which just adds white noise just to crisp it up in the high end, basically. So yeah, we'll have a look. We'll start with the character lead on its own. So we'll reset this preset to an init preset. So these are all four of these are done using Silent. So very simple. If you know Silent, follow along. If you don't, I'm sure this transfers to pretty much any subtractive synth. You can probably make a similar kind of sound. So the init preset sounds like this. And you can hear the notes clashing over each other where they overlap. And that's because there's no mono legato mode on yet. So we put the mono legato mode on and put the portamento setting up to about 66.398 if you can manage to get that. But round about between 11 and 12 o'clock on the portamento dial. And that means we get this sound. So you can hear it start to bend a little bit. Now, the ASDR envelope, ADSR envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the attack slightly to remove any clicks. When we re-trigger the oscillator, it can cause a bit of a click or a pop, and we don't want that. Personal preference. So yeah, moving on. Then we're going to raise the release to about 2.6. And this is another envelope tweak. This allows us to have a bit of a longer tail once the MIDI note has ended. And it just lets the note run a little longer than it otherwise would. So it sounds like this. So there's a little bit of a tail coming out now. Now for oscillator A1, we want to go with the volume, leave that as it is. The phase we want to turn up to around about 10 o'clock, between 10 and 11 o'clock, roughly. The detune on 0, the pan and the stereo also left standardly. It's a saw wave, it's on one voice and re-triggers on. So you end up with now a very similar sounding sound. The phase will make it, it basically tells the oscillator at what point of the saw wave to start triggering, which can help avoid issues with the oscillators clashing with each other. It makes it just sound a bit more full if there's no frequency masking going on. So yeah, that's what we want. Now oscillator A2, we're going to lower the volume slightly to about 2 o'clock. We're going to up the phase all the way up to about 230 degrees, or 2 o'clock on the clock as well. And they're different. Phases are different, so they start at a different point. The detune 0, stereo, everything else, retrig on, one voice, and this is going to be a pulse wave or a square wave. Silent calls it a pulse wave, but it's a square wave. And then with this one, we want to up the fine to about 0.06 on the dial, very, very slightly. And then you end up with this sound. So you're starting to hear a little bit of this sound come through now. Next steps to filter it. Just on filter 8, there is no part B to this, by the way, so it's just purely a part A. Just 2 oscillators in silent. So we've got a low pass filter on 24 dB slope. The cutoff we're going to turn up to about 6.6, and this just opens up the filter a bit more than it is by default after the low pass has been applied. I should have explained this better. We put a low pass on it, so we've now got the full sound which we had, and we're lowering the cutoff to 6.6 to cover it up a little bit, but we're going to then increase the drive, and that will give us a little bit of the bite back, which is what we want after the high-end frequency has been taken out. So then it sounds like this. You can see it puts a sharp bell curve on the filter itself, so that you get a peak, an EQ peak on the filter. And then with that, we're going to also up the resonance, so to about 2.1, or about, just after 9 o'clock, between 9 and 10 o'clock. And it's starting to sound more like it, but it doesn't have any grip to it yet. And that will become a big part of getting grit, comes from the mod envelope and mostly the LFO. The mod envelope is to get an attacky transient. We want to up the decay on this a little bit, just a tad. We want to set this to pitch A and B. And we want to give this just a little bit of pitch. So now you end up with without. If you up the decay a lot, you can hear what it's doing. It's basically just pitching up every time a note plays. It starts at a slightly lower, starts at a slightly higher pitch and comes down on a decay envelope. So we just want a little bit of a decay envelope on this to get it to sound like it's sort of clicking in a nice way. And then on the LFO, we want to up the rate to 1/64. So every bar, it's going to hit 64 times. We're going to up the gain to a little tiny bit, not a lot. Barely anything. We're going to set pitch A and B again, and then we're going to up the pitch A and B to a little bit, and you'll hear this dramatically changes. So this is what it sounds like. So now we've got a wobbly sound. There's a little bit of vibrato in the sound. That's what we wanted. It makes it have a bit more movement in the sound, which is going to prepare us when we do the next thing, which is adding clip distortion. Fully maxed out, sounds like this. And we're starting to shape the sound a lot now, this with the effects. We want an EQ. We want to set the bass gain to around about 3.5 dB, the frequency to about 170 hertz. So just about 1 o'clock on the clock. The treble we want to set to about 8.1 dB, and the frequency on that we're going to do 1200 hertz, and that gives me a nice bite to the sound, which you will hear. At this point, we're almost done with the sound. We want to put some compression on this to just crush it a little bit. So we're going to do some at 2.8 ratio with a threshold of -13. We're going to give it a tack of 11 milliseconds, not a lot at all, and then the release is going to be about 114. Not too much, just not too small, but not too long either, which should give it a little bit more of a crushed sound. Yeah, so that basically just brings up the quieter frequencies and boosts them a little bit to just round out the sound. And that's it for that sound. You end up with that. So moving on, we've got the main supersaw. And this one, if we clear this one up, we'll leave the... actually, it won't be that easy to tell. So we'll leave the... leave this soloed for now, and I'll play them together once we've created this sound. This sound basically is quite a safe supersaw. It's not too much going on, really. Again, we want to set the mono legato and put it up to the, if you can, the exact same value as we had on the other one, and that will ensure that they're going to have the exact same notes gliding between the notes. So that's important for this. The ADSR envelope in this one, we want just to up the release a little bit. Again, quite similar to what we had on the character lead. And that means that they both have a note to trail off on, basically. This is still an init preset, so sounds very similar right now to what we had before when we started the character lead. But with this one, we've got a saw wave. We want to chuck it up to 8 voices and turn the retrigger off so that we don't retrigger the oscillator every time we play a note. Stereo and pan, we can leave the phase, actually, all of the phase on the supersaw, all the phases are 0, but the detune is what changes, and that's the phasing between the voices. So we're going to put this up to about 6. It's around 1 o'clock, between 1 and 2 o'clock on the clock. And we end up with a sound that sounds like this. So, very detuned supersaw. So what we're going to do is we're going to make another 8-voice saw supersaw, retrigger off. The volume's still maxed out, no phase, and this time the detune is going to be 3.6. And we end up with this. Which sounds more like a standard supersaw. And then if we move over to part B, we're going to do the same thing again. So saw, 8 voices, retrigger off. And we may as well do it for this one as well. 8 voices, retrigger off, saw. For this one, we want to set the detune to around about 3.8 or 10 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock. And then on this one, we want to set the detune to about 5.1. And then here we are. We have now a supersaw. I should remember, you can copy the ADSR envelope over to part B, so you get the same release time on both parts of the supersaw. That's important. And we'll end up with this sound now. And now we're nearly done with this, but we want to put an EQ on this to just get a little bit of bite out of it. We're going to set the bass gain to quite low, around about 9 o'clock. The bass frequency we're going to put to actually about where it was. Then the treble, we're going to lower that slightly to about 11 o'clock. And the frequency we're going to put up to about 1 o'clock. And we get a little bit of a bite now. It's just got a more satisfying sound to it. It's not as tame, for lack of a better word. With that, we're going to copy this preset, because this preset here, if we clear it, for the higher supersaw, we're actually going to just use the exact same supersaw that we made, and all we're going to do is we're going to up every single oscillator by 1 octave, so it's higher, which will make it sound like this. And then for oscillators A1 and A2, we're just going to change these and make them a quarter pulse instead of a saw. And that will give us this. Now to take this one step further, what I like to do is fine tune the notes slightly. So with these notes here, I'm going to put about 11 o'clock on the fine on that. On oscillator A2, I'm going to put it up instead, so that there's one slightly detuning lower pitch and one slightly detuning into a higher pitch. And on part B, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. We're going to lower B1 and we're going to raise B2 just a little bit on both, just to 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock respectively. And that will give us this sound. So we're nearly done now with all these sounds. We've got the noise layer to do left, so we'll clear this preset. I'll show you. This is a very, very simple layer, but it's just one oscillator, A1. It's got nothing changed apart from the wave is a noise. We're going to use 5 voices. We're going to re-trigger it, which will give us this sound. And that doesn't sound okay on its own. So the trick here is we grab the filter and we band pass it. Keep it on a 24 dB slope, and we're going to set the cutoff to about 1 o'clock. And that will give us a curve like this on the noise, which in the higher end. Now, what we want to do to make this sound better is we're going to slightly distort it round about between 9 and 10 o'clock. And then we're going to chuck an EQ on this. The bass frequency completely down. We don't want to affect that. We've only got white noise to play with here, so we're going to set the treble frequency, the treble gain, we're going to set that to around about 1 o'clock, and the frequency up to about 5,500 hertz, and that will give us this sound. Now, one thing we can do with this, same as the others, is to put mono legato mode on, just to make sure it doesn't play overlapping notes. And the last thing to do with this is it's a bit loud, so we'll lower the main volume down to about a quarter of the way. This is optional. You could do this in your mixer. It's irrelevant. It's up to you. So then all 4 of these become this sound. Now, the processing side of things, we go to the character lead first and we put these back on. We've got a bit of EQ here. We're slightly cutting out the lows. We're cutting out the high end for unwanted frequencies. I will show you this now. We'll turn off the next step. If we listen to just the high end, it's very hard to hear. I don't know how YouTube is going to affect this, but there's some very high-end information here that's very hard to hear in your ear. So we get rid of that to free up some more headroom. And then I like to do a little notch. On where just where I think it bites the best. And then add some saturation. So saturation knob. Let's put it on keep high. And this will increase the gain as well. So to counteract that, I have lowered the mixer track, but for the sake of the video, I haven't actually bothered mixing all this again. I didn't want to go too in depth with the full mixing process step by step. So I'm just showing you what I did after the fact. Then you've got the main supersaw layer, which is very similar. It's just an EQ curve with another notch where I thought it sounded the best, just a slight boost. Similarly with the high supersaw, another one, very similar. Cut out the unwanted frequencies. In this case, there's quite a lot. Cut this all the way down to 10k, just because it has such an awkward hiss to it. You'll see what I mean if I solo it and mute this band. It's very noisy, bit hissy, bit too hissy, and I wanted to cut out the hissy and let the noise layer do that part, just because I think the noise layer does it better. It sounds better. And the noise layer is just a very steep low cut all the way down to around 2 to 3k with a cut on the very high end again. So altogether with that, you end up with this. So that's where a lot of the processing comes in. Then on the main channel, we've got another saturation knob, and this is the bust group. So all 4 of these layers now go into this one group, this bus, and I'm now affecting all 4 of these leads at once. So I wanted to add extra saturation that we didn't have on the other 3 layers, but I also just wanted to saturate more again, just to bring out a bit more grit in the sound. So we end up with this. And of course, this does again increase the gain slightly, so you have to be careful of that and bring down your levels accordingly. Make sure you aren't clipping. In this case, I'm going into buses with compressors and then limiting. So that's that step. Now here, I'm just removing some resonant frequencies that are being notched. And you'll see what I mean if I play the sound and then solo these. It's a horrible sound. This is that. Really ear-piercing resonant frequencies. So I'm just lowering them slightly, and I will play an A/B so you can hopefully hear the difference. just tames those resonant frequencies slightly, which is what I wanted. Now, a little bit of my secret sauce, I used to add the reverb directly to this lead bus. But I've actually more recently liked to separately process the reverb. And what I do is I put the dry signal from the lead into the reverb and also into the master bus. And then I mix the reverb, which will be 100% wet of a signal, also into the master bus. So you've got the dry and the wet signal parallel processed into the master bus, and then you have more control over how much reverb you want. And it also doesn't make the main lead push as far into the background because you still got a dry signal cutting through. So I'll show you what I mean. So I have a peak controller here. I like to control the peaks on my reverb and delay, and so that when the lead plays, the reverb and delay retract, so they don't play as loudly in the mix. And then when the main sound stops, then the reverb and the delay will shoot up to 100% and make this big space fill out afterwards. So this is what it sounds like with reverb and delay on it. And without. So you can hear it makes quite a big difference. And that gives you the big echo, and that gives you the echo, the space between the notes. And what we get with the parallel processing is you can make the reverb really subtle, really overpowering, or anywhere in between. And I like it round about here. The reverb itself is just 100% mix, really big decay, 5 seconds, cutting out the lows of the reverb and pushing quite a lot of the highs, so you get quite a nice sound to it. And the delay is quite simple, ping pong delay, slightly lower the wet so we don't get so much bouncing around, because the delay tends to stack and we don't want it to stack too much because it'll interfere with the main melody. So just to show you what the reverb sounds like, if I turn down the mix on the dry signal, you'll just hear the reverb. And this is why I like doing it this way, because you just get a little bit more control. Now, I'll put the effects back on here, and we can go one by one through these. So, similarly again, once this has been through the reverb and the other processing, I then do another EQ just to chop out any low end, just to make sure that none's coming through, just to leave myself with a bit more headroom in the bass. And then just do another notch again, where I think it sounds good, just to give it a little bit of a boost. Very subtle. Then we've got an OTT, which really just slams the sound down, but brings out a crunchy high end in it, which is just pleasant to the ears. And that is pretty much starting to form our sound. It's basically there, but I then add a Molotov. This compressor is free. You can get it from Tokyo Dawn Labs. It's one of my favorites just because of the way it sounds. And I just crush the sound even more here, but it gives the reverb a lot more power, for lack of a better term. if I show you, I'll try and show what I mean. I'll A/B this, and you see if you can hear the difference in the reverb specifically. The reverb just becomes huge, and I love the way that sounds. And then I just have a filter for filtering, and then a kickstart for sidechain. Very basic, 65% classic chain. That'll pump it. So there we are. We have the sound, and then this new sound, if we play it all together, we will have very similar to what we had at the start. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know if you'd like me to cover anything else, and I'll catch you in the next one.